In this video, we will talk about the simple view of reading. The simple view of reading is an expression of the idea that there are two different levels of processing when reading to understand a text. Indeed, there is a dimension of word reading and a dimension of comprehension, as we've said before. In the simple view of reading, skilled reading is taken to be fluent reading with understanding. But of course, everyone agrees that the purpose of reading is to understand. And so for the simple view of reading, the main outcome under consideration is reading comprehension. So in the simple view of reading, reading typically refers to reading comprehension. So this R stands for reading comprehension. And the simple view of reading says that reading comprehension is the product of decoding and language comprehension. In other words, D stands for word decoding skill and L stands for language comprehension skill. So the simple view of reading says that understanding what you read is a product of being able to read the words and being able to understand language. This is not a mathematical model. No one is really multiplying anything. The point of this sign here is to indicate that these aren't just added on top of one another. Because if you have great understanding ability, but zero ability to recognize words, so if you've never been taught to read, your reading comprehension will be zero. You will not be able to understand any passage. Conversely, if you can't understand very well, but have learned to read words, which is possible, you will not understand what you're reading even if you can pronounce it properly. So it is this multiplicative idea that is expressed in this, which looks like a mathematical formula, but really isn't. So what is the simple view of reading about? It is about the emphasis on the separation between two partially independent domains. So one is print dependent and has to do with skill in decoding words, and the other is not print dependent and has to do with language skill, oral language skill, how well you can understand. And so the simple view of reading emphasizes that these two are partially separable, and both are necessary for reading comprehension. By saying this is the simple view of reading, it is not implied that reading is simple. Indeed, the point is that this is a simplistic view that only considers two dimensions of reading comprehension because they're so central and so important. Word decoding and language comprehension are two dimensions of skill which are both very complicated and take a long time to develop across various phases, and they differ between people. So there is nothing simple within each of the predictors either. There are important developmental implications of recognizing this distinction. Because comprehension depends on having both kinds of skills, and because children have some language but no reading ability when they enter school, this means that for beginner readers, it is their progress with decoding that will mostly affect whether they understand passages or not. So in the early stages of learning to read, in the first grades of elementary school, reading comprehension depends mostly on word decoding skill and how that is developing. Later on, when decoding is mostly in place and most words can be accurately decoded, decoding plays much less of a role, and from that point on, it is language comprehension or oral language skills that are most important for reading comprehension. So reading comprehension is increasingly dependent on language comprehension skills rather than decoding skills as reading matures. The simple view conceptualization has also very important implications for difficulties with reading. Because it recognizes a distinction between two skill dimensions, we can plot this as a table. So imagine one axis going from poor word recognition to good word recognition. So the horizontal dimension here displays word recognition or word decoding skill. And the vertical dimension represents oral language skill. So poor listening comprehension down here, good listening comprehension up here. Of course, these are both gradual, but we can imagine as splitting a space in 4 quadrants. So if someone has both good word recognition and good listening comprehension, then they're going to be good readers. Someone who has good word recognition but poor listening comprehension will be a poor comprehender. This means that they will be able to read out aloud what they're looking at, but they will not be able to understand it very well, commensurate with their low oral language comprehension skill. Someone who has good listening comprehension but poor word recognition has a word level specific problem that is known as developmental dyslexia. So this is what dyslexia is for most people, is poor word recognition skills in the presence of adequate language skills. And someone who has both poor word recognition and poor listening comprehension will not be able to understand what they read and also not be able to read out aloud successfully. And these have been called garden variety poor readers. Now, this is a somewhat outdated term. You will see it in the literature. Most people don't use it anymore, and I do not recommend that you use it. The reason is that it is somewhat misleading because here it seems to imply that these poor readers are qualitatively different from the other kinds. So what does garden variety mean? Well, it doesn't have anything to do with gardens. It means not specific, but there is no implication that they're qualitatively different from poor readers that have other specific problems. It means that they have both kinds of problems. So if we go back to the table, these poor readers have both the same problems as these ones and the same problems as these ones. But the problems they have on each dimension are not qualitatively different. They just have both kinds together. This means that they actually require intervention in both domains, maybe in other ones as well if they have more problems, which is likely. But they do not need different kinds of intervention. So poor readers that have both word decoding problems and language comprehension problems will require both word decoding intervention and language comprehension intervention. And their word decoding intervention will be the same as for those who only have word decoding problems. And their oral language intervention will be the same as for those who only have oral language comprehension problems. So this is a combination weakness rather than a different kind of weakness. And this is how the implications of the simple view of reading for difficulties have to be understood.